Hey designers, welcome back to the studio. This tutorial begins our next big project. That's going to have a few iterations and sort of unfold over the course of probably 2 weeks. And it begins again with some basic cut fold paper techniques. But unlike our very first project this semester that were really open forms and fairly simplistic, we're going to work with some solid forms. And eventually we'll be using the sticks that you've got in your kit to frame the paper sculpture so that it actually retains a certain amount of rigidity. We'll kind of refer to architectural techniques, architectural strategies like laminating or framing structures and then skinning them so that they have not just form but solid form. This is sort of where we'll land maybe in a week or so, but today we're going to talk a little bit more about just some of the basics, right? Like how do we actually get forms to fold up out of a single sheet. One way to think about this is every time you get a box in the mail or purchase something from the store, right? Oftentimes it's folded up in some sort of cardboard box, right? And oftentimes we just sort of chuck these in the trash. But next time you get one, I want you to pay a little more close attention to the care put into the packaging. This was for a product. It's not a particularly fancy product. It's just a tool, right? But I started to kind of pay a little bit more close attention to the way it was assembled. Was it assembled using glue, or were they folds and tabs? I did my best to sort of unfold it and lay it out and take a sort of a look at all the kind of complex cuts, punctures, piercings, and shapes to make this thing come together again in a box. This particular box is used just sort of like a single corrugate cardboard, nothing too fancy, but it folds up in sort of a nice way. It's got a couple of rough exposed cut edges, but I kind of liked it. Now, if that's not too exciting, think about a company that you've purchased something from that really puts a lot of time and energy into their boxing, right? Into the sort of packaging, and maybe think about the fit and the cuts, and maybe take a look at some of the edging, right? Are there exposed cut edges or are they folds? How many cut edges are exposed? And the sort of experience of working through inside to outside, or I should say outside to inside, the opening of that package and the sort of cleanness of the design. I think that we can learn things as designers from other sort of product design, from art history. So every time you pick something up, I think it's important to just sort of spend some time taking a look at it. This time, we're going to be particularly interested in the box form with the intention that we likely will end up folding out more complex forms in the future. I've got another text by Paul Jackson that we'll take a look at that offers a couple of really interesting sort of alternatives to the simple cube as a packaging design. We aren't necessarily designing packaging, but it does kind of provide some interesting food for thought. So let's start simplistically with a cube. If you don't happen to have a cube close by, any sort of box form would do. Even a block of wood, right? But what basically I want to sort of start to think about the sides and the relationships that each one of those sides has. So our first challenge would be to sort of think about a cube and draw it out, right? And I'm just going to use some of those drawing skills that we just picked up, and these are not going to be precise drawings, not like using the templates, but just to help us think through this structure. And I'm going to make that a see-through box so that I can kind of think about all 6 sides. So for example, right, the bottom is a plane, the top is a plane, and if this is a square, count out, right, how many faces it has. 1, 2 for the tops, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the sides, so 6 total sides. And then we're going to sort of figure out the relationship of those. If I could unfold this box in my mind, how would the sides lay out? There is no singular answer to this. There's ways to do it for packaging and whatnot, but I want you to spend a little time in your sketchbook sort of figuring that out. What we're going to do today is make up a mock-up, and then we'll make up a final one that we can actually glue together. What I'm going to start thinking about is I'm going to start thinking about the base of the box as sort of my starting space, because it shares 4 sides with everything that sort of folds up around it, not unlike a flower. So I want to think of each one of these as a folding edge. So this is my sort of central piece. And then all the way around that side, I have these flower-like petals that come up. That doesn't quite get me to 6, though. I'm missing the top. And so on one of these legs, I'm going to have to add an extra box. Now, I'm going to test this out. I'm going to fold up a 2 by 2 by 2 inch cube using this technique, and I'm just going to grab some scratch paper to make that happen. Now, in order to sort of work this out, I'm going to use my drawing as an example here. I'm going to sort of imagine that my boxes are 2 by 2. That means I'm going to need a 2, 4, 6, 8 inch tall piece of paper and 2, 4, 6 inch wide piece of paper, so 8 by 6. Use an X-Acto knife and a straight edge. And since your grid of your cutting mats is set up in 1/2 inch increments, this should be fairly straightforward. Now with a 6 by 8 inch piece of paper, I should then be able to lay out my grid. I need 2 by 2 inch boxes that are all sort of arranged just like this. So to do that, I'll grid out my piece of paper. Keep your piece of paper closely aligned with your grid on the cutting mat, and the more precise you are here, the more precise your final cube will be. I have all of the basic pieces in place here. What I want to make sure I do is sort of eliminate these sort of outer boxes. I like to just sort of mark those before I start cutting. That way I sort of have a good idea of where my cuts will be and where they won't be. So each one of these pieces then removed, I'm left with my sort of initial form. I should be able to fold up each one of these to test to make sure that my form actually comes together the way I intended. For this, you may find your folding sticks we made earlier this semester really handy. I'm just going to use mine to put a valley fold in each one of these areas. Okay, so I'm actually pretty happy with the way that this cube is coming together. I know that there are other ways to sort of assemble a cube and to make a cube work, but I like this technique. It's going to allow for me to assemble, I think, a solid cube. The only thing that I'm missing would be sort of a way to join these edges. Paper has its own unique challenges as a material to work with, but just about all materials don't like to be butt jointed together. Unless we are welding, sheets of steel together with a weld there, it's just not going to hold very well. That's with wood, with papers, with just about every material we can work with here in the studios. So what we need to sort of work with is how does paper like to be assembled. Paper likes to be lap jointed. It likes to be layered with a layer of glue in the middle. So how could we lap joint our edges so that there are no gaps in between? You notice that if I tried to edge join these ones together, they just won't come together nicely. There's always going to be a little seam there. There's very little glue surface. So what I need to sort of design out would be ways for the paper to have glue tabs on the inside that would sort of hide inside the form as I fold it together, and would give me sort of a good solid surface to glue. Let's work this out in our drawing again. Come back and sort of continue to sort of hold up your model next to the drawing until you feel confident that your drawing has the glue tabs in the correct position. In order to make my cube come together, I've found out that I need a bunch of glue tabs, right? I need 4 glue tabs, 1 on each of my wings, or 2 on each of my wings to make the sort of box hold itself together in this orientation. And then this last flap, if I want this last flap to carefully close down over the top, I'm going to need a glue tab on each side all the way around. This is going to slightly modify my 6 by 8 inch measurements. If I'm not adding any glue tabs to the outsides of my piece, I won't have to change my 6-inch measurement. That's still good to go. My 8-inch measurement, though, needs to add a little bit of space down here at the bottom. Probably a 1/4 inch glue tab or so would do just fine. That means instead of working with an 8 by 6, I'm working with a 6 by 8 and a 1/4 inch piece of paper. Now, the piece of paper I cut in half from my first practice sheet just may do that for me. Let me count out my width here, make sure that I'm pretty close. Now that my basic grid is sort of drawn out, I need to consult my drawing again to sort of figure out where my glue tabs will be on my drawing itself. I want to make sure that I add 2 on each one of the wings on either side of my fold out, and then I need to add 3 to this sort of base of this design here. So I already kind of accounted for that little 1/4 inch and the extra length here, but I need to make sure I get a 1/4 inch on either side. Now the glue tabs that I'm going to use are about 1/4 inch wide. It's just it's sort of arbitrary, right? They get folded in and hidden too big, and they kind of get clunky to use as glue tabs. Too small, and they get a little bit too difficult to actually kind of fold in and work with. So I find that about 1/4 inch works just fine, just so long as they hide nicely behind your form when you're done gluing. 1/4 inch is half of the sort of marked off squares on your cutting boards. I find that it's a really handy idea to just sort of mark off these areas so that I kind of have a little visual cue of where to cut and where not to, or where's the waste. I'll just check my template one more time against my drawing, and I've got everything about right. Now I'm ready to start folding. Some of these folds are really small, so you may find that the folding tool we made earlier this semester works really, really great. I'm going to start with my small folds first and work up from there. Actually, before I fold, I'll mention one more thing. If your measurements are not exactly precise, as you fold together, your nice straight-edged fold corners may bind in the corners. So what I like to do is actually remove just a little bit of paper from the corners of my glue tabs. It's very common to see this in packaging. It does not have to be a super precise cut. You could use your straight edge and your rulers to mark it out. I usually just kind of cut off about that much. A small triangle, cut something a little steeper than a 45-degree angle or so. It depends on the material I'm working with and how much of that space will be lost as I sort of clamshell this thing together. Both of my glue tabs trimmed, I'll grab that folding tool I made earlier this semester and go to work folding up each one of these creases. Once you've got all of your creases folded, give them a little bit of a harder crease and do a dry fit on your package. We will start to talk about glue, but it is a big mistake to start gluing your tabs before you have tested to make sure that it fits. You may need to make small trimmings here and there just to make sure everything comes together. You don't want to have to do that after the gluing process has already started. Okay, so on my dry fit, I'm checking to make sure that all of my glue tabs are in the correct place. I'm also checking to make sure that all of my measurements are accurate. If any one of the sides is a little higher or a little lower than the other, that's going to result in gaps. You don't want gaps in this design. Part of the project is to see if you guys can get really nice clean folds with no gaps and that the whole thing comes together seamlessly in the end. I'm pretty happy with my bottom folds and the way that it looks, and the top folds will tuck inside, and it looks like all of those sides are going to come together nicely. So let's actually work on a bit of gluing. In your paper kit, you've got at least one last sheet of newsprint paper. Newsprint paper is the really flimsy the cheapest paper we have. If you don't have any of this left, go ahead and just tear out a piece of sketchbook paper and use that. We're going to use this as our overglue catch, or as a glue mask. And since the gluing that I've done is so small, I'm going to tear down my sheet to some smaller sizes. So these sheets are going to prevent glue from getting either on the table, but we're also going to use them as a mask so that we can carefully apply glue to the tab without getting it all over anything else. Let me demonstrate. So you have two different glues in your kit. The glue stick is the easier and more familiar of the two, and then the other one is in this black cartridge here. It's PVA glue. It looks a little bit like white Elmer's glue, but it dries flexible and it dries really fast. So I'm going to demonstrate both. I kind of like the glue stick because it's got a little bit slower set time, and you know, it's fairly straightforward to use in the tube. I don't need the brush and the kind of water situation, so I'll start with the glue stick. What I'm going to do in order to make this technique work is I'm going to use the cut paper, use the sort of overglue catch as a way to prevent glue from getting anywhere that I don't want it. So I'm going to use one piece of paper on the table and the other piece of paper on the form itself, and I'll fold the glue tab down over that paper, and what it does is it exposes the glue tab and only the glue tab to glue. From here, I should just be able to take my glue stick and rub the glue stick corner to corner, edge to edge over that piece over that flap, so that when I take out the slip sheets, the only place that's received glue is on the flap itself. Now I'm going to use basically the exact same technique to work with the PVA glue in this can. The reason I like the PVA glue instead of the glue stick is that it's really fast and it allows me to work quickly and set up this whole block. Now, quick may not be a good thing when you're first doing this, so I'll let you guys decide. You're going to need your utility brush for the PVA glue. That's the plasticky blue handle and has these orange plasticky bristles. You'll also need a little bit of water and a towel. Keep that close by because of how fast it dries. You're going to want to flush the brush out pretty quickly in between tabs so that you don't get that glue drying in the bristles. This 2-inch piece of newsprint will slip right in between the two glue tabs so that I can work both at the same time. A little bit of overglue catch underneath, and I'm ready to do my first two tabs. A light coating of glue is all that needs. Remember, we're just holding together paper, and if you overglue it, it'll get stuck down to this piece of paper and it'll ooch out onto the outsides. I'll start by carefully aligning each one of my seams and putting a very light pressure on them. That sort of gets the glue beginning. It sort of gets at a starting spot. And then I like to use the surface of the table to sort of press those glue tabs into position. The surface of the table is a nice flat space, and it gives me sort of a hard edge to push against. If I just start squeezing the paper itself, I'll distort the whole form and crush it. After pressing them down with my fingers, making sure that they're nice and clean, I may even come in with my folding tool and just put a hard crease right at the edge. Okay, now that's not bad. I went through that pretty quickly, and in just a matter of seconds, that PVA glue is going to be set and cured. So if your form has survived this far and you still haven't goofed up these seams, you're ready to close up the outside. Now the last side, the sixth side, is the most complicated because there are 1, 2, 3 different glue tabs that all need to be worked at the same time, and then we need to carefully fold them in. Now there won't be a good way for you to press on your form, so carefully aligning your piece becomes really important, and the glue placement becomes really important. The glue that will be doing the majority of the work will be right along the seam. And so as you're applying glue to your glue tabs, make sure that you've done a really careful job to glue right to the edge of your glue tabs. The sooner I can start to kind of gently press these seams together, the better. And I like to sort of purse my fingers for these last seams just to kind of kiss that in. The PVA glue sets up fast enough that you don't have to sit here and hold it for too long, but just long enough to close up those gaps. If at the end you do have a little gap that showed up, you could always sneak just a little bit of glue under the edge. Just to make sure that the form stays closed. So this cube, as I measured it out and glued it, came out pretty well. As I look over each one of my seams, I can tell that there aren't very many gaps, but I goofed on my final seams. I have some real small openings in the cracks. That must have been just a slight miscalculation in my trimmings, so that was pretty close. I hope that you guys can do even better work than I can. I look forward to seeing your work in the studio.